When I was a kid, I thought games, and as a matter of fact, a lot of other stuff, were magical. I thought they just materialized somehow on Earth in the form of a CD or a cartridge, and then I got to play them. Whenever I stumbled upon some interesting small detail, it felt like a huge discovery, like that was a secret that only I and nobody else in the whole world knew. Growing up and understanding how everything I ever used, watched, ate, wore, drank, everything was the fruit of someone else's work was a big enlightenment. You treat your food differently when you understand all the human effort put into your table. So, let's talk about taxonomy. Linnean taxonomy was a gift to the world in the 700s. Its creator, a guy called
Carl Linnaeus,
is regarded as the father of modern taxonomy. The classification of species in kingdoms, classes, orders, genera, and species, as well as the binomial system, are still, to some extent, used today. But from a contemporary perspective, Linnaeus is kinda dumb. He was born and died before we had a good, clear understanding of speciation and natural selection, and his logic of classification is limited, and he didn't have a clear understanding of evolution and genetics. To him, taxonomy should be based on characteristics rather than ancestry. Today, we have access to a whole improved view of evolutionary biology. We have access to better frameworks and better instruments for classification. And we have a scientific community mostly released from the grasps of religion. Things they just didn't have in the 700s. Because of this, being stuck with Linnaeus' criteria on contemporary biology is a little bit problematic. Modern taxonomy is not fixed. Stuff moves around quite frequently, and the concepts of kingdom, family, etc. are kind of vague. There's no objective criteria for what should be in a genus, for example. The outdated thought that considers appearance as the most important factor when classifying organisms is the root of most misunderstandings about biology today. So, some people seem rather reluctant to accept that dinosaurs have feathers, for example, because they believe dinosaurs are reptiles. But dinosaurs are not reptiles in the sense that they are iguanas or crocodiles. If you're trying to classify dinosaurs based on something that's alive today, what you're looking for are birds. Does that mean that if you want to talk about anything that touches on taxonomy, you should ignore anyone that doesn't know cladistics? Yes. Yes, you definitely should. There is absolutely no point in talking to someone who is using an outdated framework to form their opinions. A discussion is just not productive. Don't try to argue with someone that humans are apes without first explaining what a clade is. They can argue that according to their definition of apes, humans are not apes. But the hominoidea clade is clear and do not care about your feelings. I said before that to us, now in the 2000s, Linnaeus is just wrong. But that doesn't mean his work was useless, or that it didn't contribute to the advancement of science. We just found better frameworks that better fit reality. And that framework is built on top of his. The same applies to video games, the same applies to animated books, movies, and any other interest that you might have in your life. If you want to analyze something, you need to use the best framework available. JRPGs, meaning Japanese role-playing games, are role-playing video games that evolved from early emulations of tabletop RPGs. Although the name suggests that it is an RPG made in Japan, in actuality the genre is understood as an RPG with a larger focus on a laid out story and turn-based mechanics. Meanwhile, their Western counterparts place a larger attention to the role-playing aspect, with usually self-insert characters and a more action-based gameplay. Evidently, language is an important part of the experience on JRPGs, so these games are brought to English speakers with localizations, with varying degrees of quality and care. As I said before, when talking about these games, we need to use a framework that more closely fits reality. And the reality of JRPGs are that they are originally made by these folks, with these people in mind, and in this language. Not taking these into account when having discussions about those games is akin to discussing dinosaurs using outdated biology. You can do it if you don't go too deep, but there are clear limits. Most of the discourse about Japanese RPGs outside Japan is heavily influenced by their localization, with characters sometimes being completely defined by their localization symptoms. Japanese voicing often doesn't translate well, even when the localization work is well done. I think it's important to at least acknowledge that and consider it during any analysis of these works. Only knowing the localized version of a game is like only knowing dinosaurs from Jurassic Park. It's fine, it's fun, but it's not reality. There is a better way to analyze and talk about those games, a better framework. And that is the original game in Japanese and the full context of its creation. I consider this leap from localization ignorance to enlightenment to be comparable to the one I mentioned at the start of the video. You treat your video games differently when you understand the context of their creation. You start to make sense of things you dislike and things that didn't make sense, things that were cringy. You might even be more conscious about industry practices that are detrimental to your enjoyment of these games and maybe even demand change. Who knows? I must say, I am very grateful for the people who translated the games I love so much so I could play them in English, but whoever can afford to dive into the original version of these games and provide a more thorough understanding of them should. And so you don't have to, I will. Have fun playing.